Good morning, everybody. Happy Sunday. Hope your morning is going well. And we're close, guys. We are close to stuff happening. We're close to training camp. We're close to the preseason. We're close to resolution on the DK Metcalf stuff. We're close to resolution on the quarterback battle, other positional battles, right tackle, maybe some of the stuff on defense. Stuff is about to happen that is going to be clear and obvious in the quantifiable impact on the Seahawks going into the 2022 season. But before we get there, because we're definitely not there yet, there's still not a whole lot going on in the Seahawks world right now. I want to talk about something that's a little more big picture. I want to talk about something a little broader. I want to go into some detail on a topic that I think needs to be gone into. Delved into before the season starts, because I think it's important as a fan to set your expectations and have the right expectations in any season that you go into as a fan. I think you need to understand where your team is, where they're supposed to be, and where they should be. And you have to keep that in mind at all times when you are watching the team and trying to understand whether or not the season you're having is a success or a failure. So, one thing that I've noticed on recent Seahawks videos I've made, and videos in general that have been posted basically ever since the Russell Wilson trade, I see a lot of people, I see a lot of comments along the lines of, oh, you just wait, the Seahawks are going to be terrible this year, and then we're going to fire Carroll and Schneider. Oh, they're going to prove that they needed Wilson to win, and when they go 4-13 or 3-14 or whatever record, they're going to fire Pete and John, and we can go get Sean Payton. We can go get whoever. Sean Payton seems to be a popular one. Don't totally understand why, but I kind of understand why. So, neither here nor there. What is here and there is the idea of Pete Carroll and John Schneider coaching and managing for their job in 2022, and this expectation that if the team is bad, they will lose their jobs. And I think it needs to be understood going into this season that that's almost certainly not on the table. I don't think the team is even considering it as a possibility. And honestly, if given the path the team has chosen, they shouldn't. Really. When you decide to go into a rebuild, you need to understand that things are going to take time, and you cannot measure success by immediate wins and losses. So, if you're going to fire Pete Carroll and John Schneider because the first year of your rebuild doesn't go well and you lose a lot of games, when in reality losing a lot of games will probably secure you a really high draft pick that will assist in the rebuild, excuse me, that's just not good business. Now, you guys know how I feel about Carroll and Schneider. Not a big fan of the way they ran things during the height of the Russell Wilson era. I think that there were things they could have done that would have helped this team get over the top and back to the Super Bowl. They didn't do those things. They made a lot of very obvious mistakes. They've been atrocious in the draft for many, many years in a row. They did not spend their money well. And just in general, I don't feel like they were putting this team in the best possible position to have the peak of success. I'm not just talking about winning games. I'm not talking about winning the division. I'm talking about something bigger than that, something deeper than that. So I can completely understand not liking Carroll and Schneider for all that. But the situation has changed. The reason why the situation is what it was when Russell Wilson was at his peak was because Russell Wilson was at his peak. And, forget that. He's there. When you have a quarterback who is one of the best quarterbacks in the league, which Wilson was for many years, even if we all argue over how good he is now, I don't think anybody's really arguing that he was a very, very special quarterback for several years there in the prime of his career. Then your job as a coach and a GM is to build around him and find ways to supplement his ability with other players, offensive linemen, receivers, running backs, a defense, whatever way in which you decide to attack building the team around that quarterback, it should be in a way that accentuates what makes that quarterback special, diminishes what makes him flawed, and you should be able to compete for titles. If you have an elite franchise quarterback and you're not competing for titles, then I think somebody's made a very big mistake. And the mistakes that the Seahawks coaching staff and front office made were clear. A lot of bad draft picks, a lot of bad free agency dollars spent. But here's the thing. We didn't fire Carroll and Schneider for those things. It's now gotten to the point where we traded Russell Wilson, having not even gone close to a Super Bowl run in the last 7 years. We bailed out on it. We gave up on it. And whether or not it was smart to bail out on it at this point does not change the fact that we had that opportunity and didn't cash in on it. But you didn't fire him, period. You could have done it this offseason, last offseason, or whatever offseason you wanted to do it. You could have moved off of them. You didn't do it. And now the gear has shifted significantly. You have downshifted all the way into a rebuild. And ignoring everything I just said about Pete and John and the job they did when Wilson was here, if you're going to tell these two guys, Pete and John, that, hey, we're starting a rebuild, or you allow them the agency to say, hey, we would like to rebuild, and you go, okay, you guys are going to be in charge of the first phase of the rebuild, you don't fire them because the first phase of the rebuild doesn't produce really good, obvious results. That doesn't make any sense. It's bad business. And the guys you bring in are going to be severely limited to people who actually like the first phase of the rebuild. Like, just as an example, let's say the Seahawks are really bad this year. Let's say they win 4 games, 4-13. Okay, you've got guys like young guys who are probably not going to be elite this year, but you're counting on them going forward to be elite next year, the year after that. Cross, Walker, Abraham Lucas, Boye Mafe. You're going to have to find a new coach and a new GM who like those pieces. Sean Payton might be like, man, I really wish we didn't spend our first round pick on Charles Cross the year before I got here. I don't like him. I'm not saying he would. I don't think that's the case. But the point is, whoever you bring in is probably going to say, man, I wish I had control of this rebuild a year earlier. I would have done things differently. I would have done things more to my taste. So abandoning a rebuild midway through when you don't know if the rebuild is working out yet, it's not good business, and I wouldn't expect this team to do it. And honestly, they shouldn't. Whatever my feelings about Carroll and Schneider's job during Wilson's heyday, they have survived Wilson's heyday. They are still here after Wilson when the priorities of this organization have shifted to this, I'm going to call it a rebuild, because look, this team had many opportunities to improve at some positions in the short term. They could have done things in free agency, maybe even the draft, certainly in recent days on the trade market, and they have consistently chosen to not really go for it. There were opportunities to get quarterbacks who are better than Drew Lock or Geno Smith. Baker Mayfield is better than both those guys. Baker Mayfield got given away to Carolina. We had no interest. Whatever Carroll said in his press conference after the combine, that tells me that we understand that this year is going to be a little bit of a down year, and we're willing to live with that. And that implies, by the way, that you are willing to live with Pete and John keeping their job no matter what. So the point of this video, what I'm really trying to lay out here, is to those of you out there who think that Pete and John will be gone if we have a really bad year, I don't see it that way at all. I think that the mission statement for this team has shifted significantly. And right now, we're looking for young players to show promise, and emphasis on that word, promise. We're not looking for them to be all pros. Charles Cross is not going to be an all pro as a rookie. Abraham Lucas is not going to be an all pro. These guys are not superheroes. They are first-year NFL players. It's going to take time. This is going to be a learning process for them. We have a lot of young players in general that are going to take time to get acclimated to the NFL. Now, some people may not be a fan of that strategy. Some people probably wish we would have kept Wilson and gone all in around him. Maybe some people, Wagner as well. I don't think there's nearly as much resistance to moving on from Bobby Wagner as there was Russell Wilson. But either way, maybe you don't like this strategy, but now that we have picked this path, it's very hard for me to believe we would, after 1 year, go, oh, well, we didn't win 9+ games this year, so even though we're rebuilding, we want the guys who started the rebuild to get out. It's going to take a couple years for the rebuild to show whether or not it is working out. And that goes both ways, but I do want to emphasize one thing. I mostly like what we've seen so far from this core, from, this group, being Schneider and Carroll, in the early phase of the rebuild. They didn't overextend themselves to try to get a little bit better so they could save a little bit of face. They're willing to embrace whatever happens with Drew Lock. Like, trading for Baker Mayfield would have been a no-brainer if this team really was desperate to try to eke out a couple more wins this year. Baker Mayfield, based off what we've seen so far in the NFL, is better than Drew Lock. Better than Geno Smith. There are other quarterbacks you maybe could have gotten. Maybe you get one in the draft. But we didn't do that. So with that comes the expectation that your job is safe. If Pete Carroll was under the impression that he was going to get fired if the team was bad this year, do you think in a million years he would go into the year with Drew Lock and Geno Smith as his quarterbacks? Go into the season with rookies starting at both tackle spots? Go into the season with a new defense? Go into the season with Cody Barton as one of your starting linebackers? Go into the season with this cornerback position being as big of an unknown as it is? Probably not. But he is. So I can only look at these things and come away with the impression that he knows his job is safe. And honestly, unless the team were to just flat quit on him and just get blasted every week by 5 touchdowns, it shouldn't be. So I say all that kind of biting my tongue a little bit because I think that there are some real issues with the way Carroll and Schneider do things. But I will say this. We may look back on this whole thing 5 years from now and come to the conclusion that Pete and John are really good to have around when you're rebuilding, when you're starting from pseudo-scratch, when you're trying to build up a team from the bottom, than they are when the team has superstars in their prime in place. When you've got all this money invested into a player, it seemed like they didn't really understand how to work with that very well sometimes. You look at these other teams in the NFL, the Packers, the Bucks, the Rams. When they get that window, they sell their soul to try to win a Super Bowl now. We never did that. We felt like we could win anyway, or we just didn't really understand how to take that final leap. I don't know which one it was, but it just seemed like the team looked at it and went, okay, Wilson, we're going to give you all this money, but you can forget about your offensive line. You can forget about your, to a certain extent, I would say maybe running back. I mean, we did spend a first-round pick on Rashad Penny, so maybe not so much that. But it seemed like there was a little bit of there was just something missing there. Yet opportunities to make trades to try to really push for it, the way the Rams traded for Von Miller, the way they acquired Odell Beckham at the end of the season, or midway through the season last year. Seemed like those things just didn't really happen around here, even when, for all we know, something like that could have put us over the top. So maybe they're just not that good at that kind of stuff. Maybe they're not good at overextending themselves. Maybe they're not good at going all in, being aggressive. But maybe they'll pull off this rebuild really well. Maybe drafting for BPA is something they can do all day, but drafting for need for a team that is on the cusp of greatness, maybe that's just not their thing. So we may end up looking at it like that. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, I really like the draft we had. The free agency period we just had. I mean, I'm not going to act like it was anything incredible, but I think it was a good free agency period for a team that is trying to play things a little bit slow right now and let things come to them. So that's really what I'm trying to boil it down to here. I understand that a lot of people are not happy with Carroll and Schneider right now. I have issues with the way they did things over the last 9 years, but now that we have chosen this path, we just have to give them a little bit of latitude. And look, as relieving in some ways as it would be to be set free from some of the limitations of those guys, you don't want to do that in the middle of a rebuild. That's not good business. Let me know what you guys think down below. I'm going to get out of here. You can probably catch me on Twitch later today. Mariners playing a couple hours, going for number 14. Probably streaming during that, but either way, see you guys later on. Go Hawks, and yeah, let me know what you think about this one. I just don't want people to build up this expectation that we're going to fire the coach and the GM if we suck in 2022. I don't think it's happening. I don't even think it's a consideration. And I would hate for people to be disappointed, more disappointed than some of them already are. All right, go Hawks. See you guys later.